little village of Bartres is situated about 4 kilometres from the town of Lourdes. Bernadette lived there briefly at 2 different times during her life. The first time was when she was just 10 months old. Her mother Louise had been burned by a candle in the Boney Mill and could no longer nurse Bernadette. Marie Aravon-Lagousse from Bartres had recently lost a baby boy and so was able and very willing to act as Bernadette's wet nurse. Bernadette's father, Francois, missed his firstborn daughter terribly and found every excuse he could to visit her. Bernadette remained in Bartres for about 18 months, long after Louise's injuries had healed. The reason for this was because her wet nurse did not want to let the little girl go. But during this time, the Subarus had suffered their own loss. Their little baby boy, Jean, had died at just 2 months old, and they wanted Bernadette back home. And so, at the age of 2.5, Bernadette returned to Lourdes. In September 1857, Bernadette returned to Bartres when her family had fallen upon hard times back in Lourdes. The Subarus had been evicted from several mills and were on the verge of being homeless. While Bernadette didn't want to leave her family, she knew it would help her parents if they had one less mouth to feed. So she moved back to Bartres, back to the home of her former foster mother. But this time she was there to work. At the age of 13, she was given the tasks of looking after the sheep, she was in charge of the household chores, and she had to tend to Marie Lagousse's 8 children. This was a very difficult, lonely and challenging time for the young girl. At that time, Bernadette desperately wanted to receive her First Holy Communion. She therefore needed to know her catechism off by heart in French. But Bernadette didn't speak French. Instead, she spoke a local dialect called patois, and during the apparitions, the lady spoke to Bernadette in this local dialect. One of the reasons why Bernadette agreed to go to Bartres was because she had understood that the parish priest in the village, Father Adair, would help her to prepare to receive her First Holy Communion. However, on arrival in the village, it became very clear that her long list of chores was to be her priority. And soon after, the parish priest left to join a monastery. So the job of teaching Bernadette her catechism was left up to her former wet nurse. This did not go well. We are told that Marie Lagousse was a lady of very little patience, and Bernadette was just not used to learning. After all, she had only attended school sporadically during her childhood. She often called herself stupid, and this was usually confirmed to her by her former wet nurse. The improvised catechism classes were a failure. Bernadette begged her father to allow her to move back to Lourdes. She wanted to ask the sisters of the hospice for their help in preparing her to receive her First Holy Communion. In January 1858, Francois conceded and Bernadette returned to live with her family in the misery that was the Cashel. Just 3 weeks later, on the 11th of February 1858, Bernadette saw the lady for the first time at the grotto of Massabielle. When we visit Bartres, the highlight is to visit the parish church dedicated to St. John the Baptist. It was originally built at the end of the 14th century. Bernadette often prayed and attended Mass here during her second stay in the village, from September 1857 until January 1858. She was very familiar with the 17th century triptych behind the altar, depicting 3 scenes from the life of St. John the Baptist. On the left we have the Visitation. The centre panel shows us the baptism in the Jordan, and the panel on the right shows the beheading of St. John the Baptist. There are statues on either side of the triptych. These statues are quite unusual because of the fact that each statue depicts 2 saints combined into one statue. The statue on the left-hand side of the triptych, as we look at the altar, represents 2 male saints, St. Peter holding the key to the kingdom and St. Paul holding a book of epistles. The statue on the other side of the triptych, on the right-hand side as we look at the altar, represents 2 female saints. On the left side of the statue we see St. Catherine of Alexandria, who was condemned to be executed on the breaking wheel because she wouldn't renounce her faith. On the right is St. Judith carrying her sword to save her people. Among the other artefacts of interest in the church, we find a first-class relic of St. Bernadette, removed during the third exhumation of her body. We also see a page from Bernadette's notebook, showing some of her first attempts at writing, dated the 16th and 17th of December 1858, when the little girl was almost 15 years old. In the graveyard which surrounds the church, we can visit the grave of Bernadette's wet nurse, Marie Aravon Lagus. Because of the very close connection which Bartres has with Lourdes, groups often like to celebrate Mass in Bartres Parish Church, followed by a wander around the beautiful little village. There they can enjoy some beautiful scenery, listen to the bird song, and maybe even enjoy some refreshments in the local cafes before boarding the coach back to Lourdes.